to this virtual hosting event, and to all the candidates for agreeing to participate this afternoon. Right off the cusp, I'd like to say with virtual things, anything could happen. So please accept my apologies if I disappear or anyone else disappears, and we will try to make it run as smoothly as possible. But I think we've all had interesting experiences recently with online events. I do have a backup, so if I disappear, Kirsty will take over until I try to find my way back into the room. Okay. So my name's Claire Donaghy. I'm the chair of the Scottish Cancer Coalition. And for those of you who don't know, the Coalition is a partnership of voluntary organisations who are dedicated to improving cancer services and outcomes for patients in Scotland. We are the only organisation of our kind in Scotland, and our membership has a range of expertise and experiences representing a wide range of cancers. We're all aligned with a shared vision for collective action to make a difference and improve outcomes for cancer patients. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. The event is being recorded. I know you've all been notified ahead of the event, and it will be shared online afterwards. Attendees who are not speaking, your cameras, microphones and chat box will be disabled. For those of you who have had your questions selected, you'll be activated at the right time and then deactivated again, so you don't need to worry about that. We will also be live tweeting throughout the event, so if you're on Twitter, please join the conversation with the hashtag #SCCHustings. Okay, so over the course of the next hour, we'll be asking the candidates a number of questions about cancer services in Scotland. We received a large number of questions, and we're sorry that time will not allow us to ask all of them. The questions we have chosen have been selected carefully and cover a range of themes that are important to all coalition members. Once they're asked, each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer the question. The order for answering questions has been picked at random, so the same candidates don't have to go first or last each time. And now I will introduce the candidates for you. Here we go, first bit of technical magic. First of all, we have Alison Johnstone. Hi, Alison, from the Scottish Green Party. We then have Jackie Baillie from Scottish Labour. Hi, Jackie. We have Miles Briggs from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. And we have Rebecca Bell from the Liberal Democrats. We are also expecting David Torrance from the SNP, but I think he's got stuck in another phone call or something, so hopefully he'll join us shortly. Okay, so without further ado, I think we should start on with the questions. Okay. So the first question is coming from Susan Smith, and hopefully Susan there she is. Now Susan, I'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, hi folks. Okay, right, my question is this. What will each party do to ensure that cancer is a priority for the NHS in Scotland after COVID?
Thank you, Sue. Okay, and we'll come to Alison first. Answer that question.
Thank you, Sue. I think it's fair to say that there'll be a great deal of consensus during this meeting today, because we are all committed to ensure that cancer services are back up and running as efficiently as possible, as quickly as possible. And I know your question, how will we do this after COVID? I know that work is ongoing at the moment and that cancer work is underway. We have a candidate in the West actually who's an oncologist who's been very involved in helping us understand what we need to be doing. But I think one thing that I'd like to see a real focus on is ensuring that cancer has the workforce it needs. Because if you have the workforce you need, then you don't have the backlog that we had pre-pandemic that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. I appreciate that we're not given too long to answer these questions in detail, but I think ensuring an adequate cancer workforce has to be a key priority, and we must get to work on that now. The fact that we've had such waiting lists for such a long time tells you quite clearly that we don't have the capacity, the resources, or the staff to deal with patient demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Perfect timing. Jackie Baillie, I'll turn to you next to answer that. You need to unmute yourself, Jackie.
Thank you. I should be unmuted now.
That's it. You took away all your power.
The host wasn't allowing me to be unmuted, so I thought the gremlins have started already. Let me thank Susan for the question, because I think this gets to the heart of the matter. At the end of the day, the recovery plan published by the Scottish Government is a reasonable starting point, but let me just agree with Alison Johnstone. It is silent on workforce issues, and I don't think you can start the cancer recovery until you've dealt with the shortage in the workforce, whether that's consultants, nurses, diagnostic staff, right the way across the board, because targets just simply haven't been met for the last 8 years. Scottish Labour also published its own recovery plan. We had 4 key points that I'll rattle through. A catch-up initiative for the screening programme so that we clear the backlog by the end of the year. We wanted to establish rapid diagnostic centres. We also recognise that providing a single point of contact for cancer patients to get personalised support was something really important. And the final element for us was investing in clinical research and trials. So that's a kind of rapid run through of what we would do to get cancer services back on track.
Thank you, Jackie. That's great. Miles, I'll come to you next.
Thanks, Claire, and thank you, Sue, for that question. And I agree with what Alison and Jackie has already outlined. I think there is a lot of consensus on this. The National Cancer Recovery Plan, which the government put forward, I think is a starting point. I'm concerned about where we're going to take our services going forward. We keep hearing politicians talking about building back better. Now, what does that mean for our cancer services and for cancer patients in Scotland? Because there's an opportunity here, I think, as we recover, to redesign services. We keep talking about patient-centred care. Now, I hope we can use this opportunity, which restarting services presents, to really look at that. So I would like to see a major clinician-led exercise to look at services. As has already been mentioned, I think all parties are now really keen on speeding up the delivery of early cancer diagnosis centres. So I hope that will be genuinely prioritised. But above all, I think we need to look towards how we, together collectively now, can see where we can make improvements. Because pre-pandemic, I felt we were actually moving in the right direction for cancer services in Scotland, but I'm more concerned about the fact that we've seen such a fallback. We know already that a fifth of patients did not present during the first lockdown and were not referred into cancer services. So we need to make sure, when the Parliament gets back, there's a real opportunity to look at the priorities. And I think the best way to do that is with clinicians at the heart of that strategy, not politicians.
Thank you very much, Miles. Thank you for that. Rebecca, come to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. And yeah, like others have just said, I agree with everything they've said, to be honest. And whilst there's a huge work to do, it won't be addressed without some real thought and planning into the workforce. The Liberal Democrats would like to have the Health Secretary report annually on across the NHS workforce planning, because I think we need that level of scrutiny to see how we're going and filling the vacancies we've got currently. And if we're going to expand, if we're going to be doing, we want to see more treatment centres and earlier diagnosis, because we all know how much better it is to treat patients when the cancer was caught earlier. So that's one of the ways that we'd like to address the problem. I mean, we know that the existing targets for cancer haven't been met since 2012. So really that needs a complete look at, like, what's the point of targets if you're not meeting them? So I think, just like Miles says, that needs to be clinician-led and look at the practical ways that it's helping, because otherwise it's just unhelpful for patients if they have this expectation that isn't met. So we're very keen to have a look at what we're measuring and how, and redress that when it's not working.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Rebecca. And I'd like to welcome David Torrance. Apologies, David, you'd come in under a secret identity, so we didn't realise that you were in the room. Very warm welcome from the Scottish Cancer Coalition, and thank you for joining the hustings today and for stepping in last minute when Claire Adamson had to go and deal with another piece of business. Would you like us to repeat the question? I'm not sure at which point.
I think I've got the gist of it, Claire. And I'd like to say to Sue, thank you for the question. The £114.4 million cancer recovery plan goes some way to addressing the problems. But I think what is key to it is fast-track diagnostic centres. There's already 3 planned, of which we have 1 in Fife. And I've spoke to the chair of Fife. That should be up and running very early in this year. And that should help, because early diagnosis helps life-saving. Early diagnosis helps people, chances of being saved very, very early. And as somebody personally in my family who has been affected by it, because I have BRCA2 members, female members of my family. My father died in 12 weeks of a brain tumour. That's why these early detection rates are really, really important to us. I know in our manifesto, we are looking at having these early detection centres dedicated across all of the NHS wards, and that will bring in an additional 1,500 staff if we re-elected as a government, because that's really important to have dedicated staff for cancer treatments and diagnostics. So for us, that is key to it. So thank you, Claire.
Thank you, David. Great answer. Thank you. Okay, so that's the end of question 1. Excellent, we got through that. Our second question is coming from Jo Williamson, and I believe she should now be able to unmute herself and ask her question, or his question, sorry. Is Joe a man?
Indeed.
Sorry, I do apologise, Joe.
Okay. No, Joe is short for Jonathan, but anyway.
So right. I see it now, sorry.
My question is, how will your party tackle Scotland's obesity crisis to reduce the risk of cancer and many other conditions which put added pressure on the National Health Service?
Thank you, Joe. And this time we will come to Jackie first. Oh, Jackie's muted again. I think we need to unmute her. There we go, Jackie.
There we go. Thank you so much. A great question, Joe. Thank you very much for asking it. We know now that obesity actually increases the risk of developing about 13 different cancers. So that link is now established. I am genuinely disappointed that the Scottish Government dropped their proposal for an obesity bill because of COVID, and I think we need to get that back on track. So Scottish Labour is proposing that we will bring forward a health harming products bill, so we regulate the marketing, the promotion, the labelling of food and drink that has little nutritional value, but we also know causes obesity. So that's one of the major things we would do. And it is a matter of regret, again, that the Scottish Government didn't find time to do it in this last session of Parliament.
Thank you, Jackie. And we will turn next to Alison.
Thank you very much. I think diet is a huge part of, well, we've got to work hard to improve the Scottish diet, because in too many cases it is full of calories and it is devoid of nutrition, and it's making too many people unwell. And of course, it does have a part to play. So we need to do whatever we can to prevent those cancers and diseases that are indeed preventable. In our manifesto, we have a commitment to free access to sports facilities and physical activity for young people. We don't think your ability to engage in that kind of activity should depend on whether or not you can afford it. We've got to develop a more active, healthy population. I think when we come to looking at free school meals, which, you know, I'm pleased the Greens have played a part in rolling out, we've got to make sure that these are of the highest standard and that every attention is being paid to make sure that they are packed full of nutrition and that they don't have the ingredients that are making too many of us unwell. I think we need to be looking at a supermarket levy too. We should not be, you know, if you're determined that you're going to profit from the sale of unhealthy products, there has to be some retailer responsibility in regards to that. With regards to alcohol too, I think we need to get far tougher on the way we advertise that. I mean, sometimes, you know, for young people that I've spoken with, it's absolutely everywhere, alcohol advertising. yeah, I think those are some of the things that we need to do, but it does frustrate me that in all the time I've been in Parliament, that's 2 sessions now, progress has not been made in tackling this. There seems to be hesitance to, you know, get to grips with the major retailers who, let's face it, are doing very, very well at this time and even previously. It remains the case that far too much of the food, we know that Scots seem to have a particular attraction to deals in supermarkets, that's something that we buy into readily. But so often the things that we buy into readily are the things that are doing us the greatest harm. So that all needs to come to an end too. I think there is much to do in this. Thanks, I've run out of time.
Yeah, sorry, Alison. Thank you very much. Rebecca, I'm going to come to you next.
Thanks, Claire. And yes, Jonathan, this is a really good question because like Jackie said, I was so sad to see that bill not make it into the Parliament just finished, because I think that was a real opportunity to address some of these long-standing issues. And I think in my day job, I work for our health spokesperson at Holyrood, and so I regularly look at these statistics. And we do know now that it's extraordinary, the link between obesity and developing cancers. And I think when, you know, these preventable cancers, really there's scope for saving lives. And if you look at the progress we've made with smoking over the last few decades, you know, it's remarkable. You know, pretty much all of society knows that if you're smoking, it's going to affect you, your health. Obviously, there's way to go on that still. But if you look at that, that does give me hope, because if we can get as a nation our understanding about, okay, it's my responsibility for my own obesity and what the risk is with that, then I think people will feel, you know, just with that knowledge, why it's so serious. And that won't be easy, but I do think public awareness is part of it. You know, when you look at those statistics, it is really remarkable. So I think translating that, obviously it's a lot of jargon, into the wider public is important. And others have mentioned young people, that's really important, that right from your young age, you've got the knowledge about what good healthy eating is, that you can take into adulthood. I am concerned about some of the deals we see in the supermarkets, the marketing. So I think engagement with the industry on that, because you'd like them to do it themselves, but if not, we need to think about some intervention. We've certainly had some successful things with alcohol so far, but I think there's a long way to go on this.
Sorry, this is obviously a hot topic because Rebecca's gone over as well now. So thank you, Rebecca. So David, I'll let you answer this next.
Thank you, Claire. It's something that's very close to my heart, because it's one thing that the pandemic's brought to us is the rise in the fast food sales. You just need to see a number of people, and it's increased in the number of premises who have increased staff to deal with online orders. So for me, it's key that education is part of it. We have got to educate people out there, and regulation has to be part of it as well. You just need to see how effective minimum alcohol pricing was and the reduction in alcohol consumption. So it's key that we look at regulation in certain areas to try and restrict the fat, salt and sugar content in food. But we also need to have a UK approach in this, because I think it's got to come from all the devolved and the UK governments to tackle this head on, because it's something, you could prevent cancer by a healthy lifestyle, it's something that we have to seriously promote. And I think you have to do it through an advertising campaign as well, just to highlight the risks of obesity and the cancer risk to it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That's great. And Miles, finally, I'll come to yourself.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for that question, Jonathan. I agree with what's been said by all our speakers. I was disappointed that the bill was removed. I hope it's brought back in this Parliament. I think all parties actually have moved towards more regulation around unhealthy food promotions. If nothing else, the pandemic's really demonstrated the problems we have with an obesogenic society in High Street, and the online shift we've seen, as David's outlined. I think all of us have been guilty of sort of using that and ordering food that way. And actually, I would like to see some of the work around how poor our nutrition's been during the lockdown, because I think all of us are guilty of that, to be quite honest. One of the things I would like to see, and I think we need to do this not necessarily just as a Scottish Parliament, but with local government very much at the heart, is how we actually create more opportunities for people to have affordable exercise and not always link that to sport. I think a lot of people have discovered their green space. Here in Edinburgh, the council actually, before the pandemic, had invested in outdoor education equipment. Now, I've for a couple of years gone past these and never seen it used. During the pandemic, it's used all the time. And I think that's a really step forward. So I think we need to really look at where we as a country can improve our health, where each and every one of us can do what we want. If that's just walking, great. But if there's cheaper access to sport facilities, we need to actually push for that in the next Parliament as well.
Thank you, Miles. That's great. And Joe, thank you for that very interesting and sort of discussion involving question. Thank you very much. All right, so question 3 is coming from Ali Boyle. So Ali, I can see you on screen. If I ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. How will you ensure that there is ongoing psychological support for all cancer patients in Scotland?
Thank you, Ali. And this time, sorry, Miles, I just left from you, but I'm going to start with you this time. You can go first.
Sure, thanks, Claire. Thanks for that question, Ali. 5 years ago when I was first elected, this was one of the key issues for me, because I know from friends and family who have gone through services that the mental well-being of a cancer patient isn't often a key parity until maybe the end of services. And that's something I think we need to look to change. Now, I take my hat off to some of the third sector organisations and charities who are providing this, for example, here in Edinburgh, Maggie's Cancer Centre, and across Scotland, the services they provide. But what I'd like to see is, for when people are diagnosed, that they have a consistent pathway on mental health as well, and ideally for a cancer navigator, a single point of contact to be with that individual and link them to services. And I think what I've been really kind of quite concerned about is, for a lot of people who are from deprived communities in Scotland, they're the last ones to ask for that help, and they're the last ones to get it. And we need to change that. And I think actually working with the third sector, we can really improve that.
Okay, thank you very much, Miles. I'm going to turn to Rebecca next.
Thanks, Ali. I'm going to try really hard for 90 seconds on mental health, because it's something I'm the party spokesperson and I care passionately about. So thank you for the question. And often, there needs to be space in the patient treatment. There's so much to do with your cancer physical problems that perhaps the mental health problems become secondary and don't get addressed. And when that happens, it can become worse. And it is a specialist support you need, because it's great to expand mental health services, but it's a particular type of difficulties that cancer patients are going through. So specialism definitely helps. Like Miles says, there's fantastic third sector organisations doing this, but it needs to be consistent. So you are supported from the beginning of your diagnosis. And so we have a programme to expand treatment options. So psychologists and psychiatrists are appropriate for some people, but perhaps you could see a counsellor. And we want to make them more available at a local level. So that would be perhaps in your GP surgery, some walk-in crisis centres for when people are really sick, and in situ in hospitals and schools as well, and generally a more accessible service in the community. So we have more choice of treatment, really address, people on mental health waiting lists. They are very long lists, and we want to see that absolutely change with the proper investment.
Thank you, Rebecca. And you did keep it to time, so well done. David, I'll come to you next. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you, Ali, for the question. Mental health is really important. The Scottish Government's got £120 million Mental Health Recovery Fund, which is the largest investment by any government since the Parliament started. We've recruited over 500 additional mental health workers, and are on key to recruit an extra additional 800 dedicated mental health staff by 2022. But like Rebecca says, our manifesto would like to see somebody in place in every doctor's surgery. So you're there direct, that's a point of contact that you're most likely to see all the time. So there'll be somebody there to help you and take up your case at all time. And that is really, really important, because I just know how individuals and families go through when you get devastating news, and how they actually cope with it, and what's lack of support there is sometimes to deal with it. And I just know with my own individual case. But the third sector has an important role to play as well, like Maggie's or Macmillan. And I know in our manifesto there's £8 million to be given to Macmillan's to help create that, and so everybody can actually get that point of contact with them. So I hope that answers your question, Ali.
Thank you, David. Alison, I'll turn to you next.
Thank you. Thanks, Ali. It's a really important question because life isn't the same after a cancer diagnosis. And I think we have to acknowledge that and make sure that this cannot just be about physical, support for the physical condition. It's got to be about your whole well-being, because the stronger you are mentally, the more able you are to, just to take care of yourself optimally, and for your family to feel that you're being supported as a whole person rather than just looking at the one aspect of your care. We want to see 10% of frontline health spending going to mental health by 2026. We want to see mental health clinicians in every GP surgery, so that there's always someone there at every appointment that you might go to. We want GP appointments to be a 15-minute minimum, so that you've got time when you're going to your local surgery, because you will continue to go there, to have a discussion that's a bit more meaningful. And we want to see welfare rights advisors and links workers in surgeries as well, so that there's no wrong door. Because I think, I know some of the organisations who are involved this afternoon do fabulous work, in particular, case of my own family. There was so much help there for financial issues around being unable to work and so on as a result of cancer diagnosis, and it isn't something that you immediately think of, and it leads to a great deal of mental distress, and it just exacerbates everything. So I think the more we can do to get a holistic, joined up service that looks at the patient in the round and looks at, what does this diagnosis mean for your ability to work? Are we making sure you've got access to all the financial support that might be available? What impact?
Thank you, Alison. Sorry, you've run over again. You're very passionate about these topics, and I'm sorry to cut you short, but we've tight schedules to get through. Okay, and finally then, Jackie, I think we can unmute you.
You can indeed. For some reason, we appear to be slower at my end than everybody else, but thank you very much for the question, Ali. Can I say, the one thing we've discovered during the pandemic is the real impact it's had on people's mental health. So there is clearly a need for investment across the board. So this is really the opportunity that we need to seize now to deal with it, because even pre-pandemic, waiting lists were too long, targets were never met. It is fundamentally the Cinderella service of the NHS, and we need to change that. I'm conscious that in England and Wales, they spend 11% of their budget on mental health services. In Scotland, we only spend 8%. So there's a real gap that we need to close. But key to that is making sure there's enough staff available, and there's simply not enough just now. So whether it's, counsellors, psychologists, psychiatrists, we need to reinvigorate the mental health workforce and make sure we have enough of them. We also have, like others, a plan for a mental health worker in every GP surgery. But I think the thing is, for a cancer patient, it is that one-door approach. It's that single point of contact that will help you get through, not just the financial assistance you might need, but actually also the emotional well-being, as well as the obviously the physical treatment that's required. So Labour is committed to ensuring that single point of contact exists for cancer patients, with a support worker that signs you directly to mental health services. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you, Ali, for that question. Hopefully those answers will help. Okay, so next, our next question is coming from Joe Wilcott, and Joe is from Brain Tumour Research. You're unmuted and your camera's on, so go for it.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, everyone. So my question is, what will your party do to enhance cancer research in Scotland, especially for brain tumours and other cancers without known causes?
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for your question. And this time I'm going to come to Rebecca first this time. So Rebecca, if you'd like to answer Joe's question.
Hi, and hello, Joe, and thanks for you and all the work you and your colleagues do. Yeah, so I think diagnosis and technology are behind, the next cutting edge treatments. So we have to support them properly. We'd like to see increasing the genetic screenings for cancers, because what we know now compared to 10 years ago is amazing, but we need those programs to be expanded if we're going to keep learning more. We'd also, the Detect Cancer Early program, we'd like to reinvigorate that So there's new ways to sort of promote importance of screening. So patients are, taking up the offers that they have, and because cancer screening programs can be such an effective tool with early diagnosis and treatment and successful treatment. So that's one of the ways we want to do it. We also know that the geography of Scotland, sometimes it's more challenging. So we'd like to see some mobile preventative services going around for screening as well. So that's a couple of ways we'd like to do. And we'd also like to integrate screening services with social prescribing where we can, so those services can run concurrently and help the patient in a different way from each aspect of that. So hopefully that will answer your question.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that. David, coming to you next.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for your question. As somebody who, I lost my father in 12 weeks from being detected with a brain tumour to lasting 12 weeks. It was devastating for the family, and I know how every individual in the family felt about it, and the lack of anything we could do about it, or the NHS, because where it is. So I think investment in programmes to detect early, and there's a £20 million investment for the Scottish Government to detect cancer early, will go a long way. And as I mentioned earlier, the fast-track detention centres, there's 3 planned as pilots, but in the manifesto, we're planning to put 1 in every NHS location board, which will help, because early detection is something that is key to it. And in my father's case, he had it for a long, long time, and it never showed any signs until it was too late. So I think key for that is early detection to try and save lives and prolong life. But investment in new treatments, new cures has to be high on the agenda, because I'm a great believer everything has a cure if there's enough time and money put into it and enough investment. And there's great charities out there doing great work. And some of the universities in Scotland are doing fantastic work in this area as well. So it's key to keep supporting them as a government and the third sector as well.
Thank you, David. Great. Alison, going to come to you next. And I'm going to be strict in time, so I'll nod my head furiously as your time runs out.
Thank you, Joe, and yeah, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think it's a really important question. I mean, what we need to do in the first instance is support research institutions to restart clinical trials. And I think if, the pandemic has clearly shown the importance of science and scientists and clinicians and public health experts all working together. So I'd like to think that we can use the same sort of approach to just make sure we're on top of this, to understand the implications of such diagnosis for people, because too often I think it is a surprise. In my own case, I have a friend who discovered he had a brain tumour because he had an accident when he was out biking and hit his head. That's the kind of thing that we hear all too frequently. So I think we need to review screening programmes to check that we are screening as adequately and as appropriately as we might be. We also need to make sure that people are aware of what signs and symptoms might be, because all too often we hear of people being passed from pillar to post and not being diagnosed until a very late stage. So that's something we want to avoid. So that's about training for clinicians. It's also making sure that they have the time to properly engage with people when they do present with symptoms. But I think funding our research institutions adequately and making sure that the importance of such research is well and truly understood is key.
Thank you. Perfect. You got it right on the nose there, Alison. Well done. Thank you. All right, time. Jackie, I'll come to you next. Thanks. Still the lag to get
Hooray. This is great. Can I say thank you for the question, Joe? I think research is absolutely critical and underpins our understanding of cancer, and the new treatments, the trials are absolutely critical in ensuring that we learn and we get more successful at tackling all sorts of different cancers. And I'm very conscious COVID has led to a lot of trials being paused. Large research funders are struggling because a lot of the cash that they rely on from donations has dried up. And that's had a real impact on research budgets as well as trials. So for me, for my part, Scottish Labour would look at, is there any way we could pump prime some of this to get it working again, to get it back functioning again? Yes, absolutely early detection, but actually we need visibility across all cancers to ensure that there is a focus on them. And lastly, let me say, and this was something that I was astonished by, since April 2020, there's a 98% drop in the number of patients recruited to UK clinical trials since before the pandemic. Now, that is a shocking statistic. We need to get that kick-started immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And Miles, I'll come to you last this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Joe, for that question. I think we all need to, and when I say this, I mean both the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament, work on a research recovery plan. And one of my greatest concerns at the very outset was what would be the impact of this pandemic. We know the financial impact on charities anyway, but I want to make sure that we take forward to look to how we can protect and support research. I was lobbying the Treasury at the very outset to try to set up schemes to match fund some of the projects so we didn't lose them. And as Jackie outlined, we are losing clinical trials, and that will have an impact on future outcomes. And we need to do all we can to protect that. Because in Scotland, we're making some real progress. You know, I've been lucky enough to visit schemes like Precision Pank at the Beatson in Glasgow, and these schemes have huge opportunities to improve outcomes and get early diagnosis for patients and earlier treatment. So we need to protect that. Specifically on your question, I think it's time we had a rarer cancer strategy, and I'd like to see that looked at. We know the different rarer cancers often don't get a look in, so especially around earlier screening and GPs having some sort of referral pathway for rarer cancers, an earlier one developed around their knowledge, I think would be really useful. So I'd like to see progress made on that in the next Parliament as soon as possible.
Thank you, Miles. And thank you, Joe, for your question. The next question is from Heather Williams, but I don't think Heather Williams is on the call, so I'll ask it on Heather's behalf. So the question is, how do the parties plan to address cancer workforce shortages? And I think, for example, in particular around diagnostic, endoscopy and radiology. I better tell you who's come first. Sorry, I've lost my... I'll come to Alison first this time. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you. Another important question, because if we can't diagnose, then we don't have a thorough understanding of the situation in which we find ourselves. I mean, I think we know that there have been shortages in some of these fields for a very long time. So I think we could do better working with our schools, for example, and our colleges and universities, explaining to young people how meaningful these careers are. I mean, I've managed during this campaign to break my arm in 3 places. So I was actually dealing with radiography yesterday, and I had been for the last couple of weeks. And you just think, these are talented experts who really have an input into their particular specialty. And without them, the whole service is constrained and hamstrung. So I think we've got to make sure that people understand the importance of these roles, that we make them appealing, attractive, that they're paid appropriately, that they have the training they need to develop a really meaningful career in the National Health Service. And I think, as I've said, one of my main priorities here when it comes to the cancer workload is having a workforce that is really fit to tackle the demand. And that's not just about, consultants and so on. This is about this service from the minute that you come in for screening right through until, you receive the treatment that you need. But I think we obviously do need to have a campaign, because I think these particular roles for too long have had a real issue in attracting people.
Thank you, Alison. That's great. Jackie, I'm going to turn to you next. Answer that question.
Oh, that was speedy. We're getting good at this now. For me, there was no greater gap in the Scottish Government's recovery plan than the lack of mention of workforce issues. And I have to say, people might not remember this, but 10 years ago, I used to speak for the Labour Party on health. And 10 years ago, we were talking about workforce planning and gaps in workforce, and it's clearly just not been dealt with. And so this needs to be an urgent priority. Every single quarter, I look at stats where the health board misses its targets, and that's because they don't have enough staff. So whether it's diagnostics, nurses, consultant oncologists, right the way across the board, we need to sit down and work this out. I'm in favour of funding places. You know, the government does that across the board. Let's make sure that it's done appropriately, that we're doing that in a way that meets the demand that is required. This is critical. You're not going to be able to do anything else until you sort this.
Thank you, Jackie. Miles, I'll come to you next.
Thanks, Claire. I was just thinking, listening to Jackie, I was elected 5 years ago, and the first thing I did as a young, well, maybe not young, but uber keen MSP when I joined the Health and Safety Committee was say, okay, where's the workforce plans? Because I wanted to sort of see, and I couldn't believe that actually the Scottish Government didn't have a workforce plan. Now, they have now started to outline numbers around that, but we've never got that right as a country. So I think we really need to look at, as Jackie said, what do we need, where do we need it, and how are we going to deliver that? And especially around diagnosis, because we keep seeing issues with retention around diagnosis, and I think we diagnosis workforce. So I would like to see that really looked at. I would also like to see us look towards the future around this, because actually during the pandemic, we've seen some good work around, for example, self-sampling screening for cervical cancer, things like that. So there's opportunities for us to move forward with our diagnostic workforce like we haven't done previously. For example, lung cancer blood testing, that is really exciting and an opportunity we should be trying to get NHS Scotland engaged with early and get the workforce right for that. So I think there is cross-party consensus around this, but we need to, I think, formalise our workforce plan, maybe with Parliament actually having an annual update around workforce, so we can actually look at where the gaps are. And we have, above all, an international workforce, and I think we need to very much look towards recruitment issues in Scotland as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Miles. Rebecca, turn to you now.
Thanks, Claire. And yes, a really crucial question that Heather's asked. Agreeing with what Miles and Jackie just touched on about, you know, this is a problem that we've had for some time. The pandemic has just exacerbated that because of all the pausing in screening. I think it was estimated about 7,000 people are undiagnosed with cancer at this point. So there's an immediate task into addressing the backlog, and but then also our longer term strategy, because these are specialist jobs. You know, it takes a long time to train in some of these positions, so you're not going to be able to fill those gaps overnight. And also, when you're looking at the workforce planning, how many people are approaching retirement? Can we talk to them about perhaps going to part-time and still being involved in the workforce, so we're not losing people off a cliff edge? And like Miles said, the Liberal Democrats are also really keen on the idea of annual reporting, because we know it's a huge problem across different departments. But until we've got the scrutiny and the data to work out what's happening with the workforce, we can't improve into the same degree if there's an element of guesswork. And the sad thing is, you know, if the staff are working to fill places in their team long term, that's not good for them, and they won't stay in the job if they're having to be overstretched. So we need to appreciate the staff as well, so the patients can be treated.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca. David?
Thank you for that. I think key for workforce planning is to look at your age of your sector. There's many sectors, one I represent engineering, but NHS is the same. There is a whole lot getting ready to retire or have retired, and it causes shortages. So keys to actually going into the schools, making these jobs attractive to the 4th and 5th and 6th years in schools, because so many of them, if you go and speak to them, do not even look at it as a career path to go into anything to do with NHS. So it's up to us to try and get a programme there in the schools to encourage people to take up these jobs. But like Miles says, we have to cast our net far afield, because internationally there's lots of doctors, specialists out there that we need to encourage into Scotland to take up and fill these roles. And the other thing is the fast track diagnosis centres that we mentioned. There's 3 as pilots, but in our manifesto we would try and like to put one in every area in Scotland. That will create an additional 1,500 specialised jobs, which should help try and fill the shortage as well. But key to it is definitely the recruitment, encouraging people to take up these places as a job, and internationally try to bring people here to fill the gaps that we have just now.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And thanks to Heather for her question, and apologies that she couldn't get on for whatever reason. Thank you. So question number 6 is, oh, here I can see Emily, has got her camera on. Emily, I am Emily Waller from Pancreatic Cancer UK. I'll ask you to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My question is, how will your party prioritise the less survivable cancers if elected?
Thank you very much, Emily. And this time, sorry, David, I know I just went last to you, but I'll make you go first this time.
That's okay. Can I just say, this is about making people aware of symptoms. This is key, because in the rare ones, so many times the symptoms are rare and people don't know them. So it's key for an educational programme there. It's key so that GP surgeries, when you present to them, that they know straight away symptoms that are raised, so they could refer you on. Because a lot of the time, pancreatic cancer, if you get early enough, your life expectancy is a lot longer, or there's a chance you might survive it. But in many cases, people just take signs of a back pain as, oh, I've got a sore back, I've been doing too much or whatever. So to me, it is about, if re-elected, the government putting a programme out there so everybody knows about the rare cancers and the signs that are there and the symptoms. Because as I said, early detection is key to any survival rate or any extension of life.
Okay, thank you, David. Miles, I'll come to you next this time.
Thanks, Claire. This is something I'm really interested in. I think we can learn a lot from other countries. I look at what's happening around less survivable cancers, rarer cancers in countries like Canada, and I think we should be trying to replicate some of the cross-working which we're seeing within, above all, research in the university hospitals sector, which Scotland used to lead on, quite frankly. So I hope we can see that. Precision Panc, as I mentioned, I think's a real sort of hope which we're seeing, and the 4 young researchers who I met there are, they've got a lot of pressure on their shoulders to hopefully progress with their work. But above all, it's about people coming forward earlier. I think we need to look quite honestly at launching a sustained and targeted campaign to encourage people who do have symptoms to come forward early, but also for people to really start thinking about changes in their body, for example, and whether or not they can start educating the population in a wider way than we currently do around early diagnosis of some of these things. Because often I know from people who have had a rarer cancer diagnosis, they had no idea until they went to see their GP. So I think there's a real need for us to do this, not just in a clinical way, but for society to start talking about these things more. And I think we're getting there, but above all, it's one of my concerns as a co-chair of the CPG that we haven't done enough on rarer cancers and on less survivable cancers.
Thank you. Thanks, Miles. Rebecca, I'll turn to you next. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Emily. Yeah, so with this, obviously you have to treat this group of cancers somewhat differently, because it's a different patient experience. And actually, my best man Phil, we were on holiday together when his mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So because he's a doctor, he and his whole family are doctors actually and dentists, so they kind of knew how serious that diagnosis was. But like others have said, the wider public perhaps don't differentiate and know unless they know someone personally who's been through it. So I think there's certainly a patient care element, a reference back to a previous question on mental health, because just dealing with a cancer diagnosis is hard enough, but then also knowing it's terminal and just is so much for one person to cope with. So that's one element of it. But actually, like the others say, research is fundamental, because we won't be able to improve our treatments without it. And that needs to be sustained funding so these projects can continue without sort of precarious nature. I certainly agree that from seeing patients come forward earlier would be a great result. So any money we put into this campaign or awareness raising needs to be really well spent and targeted. And the research gone into it, knowing that this can have an effect, because you really want to see that, encourage people to come forward when they have symptoms and know about it. Because if you don't, if you think, oh, you can ignore it, oh, it's this or that, the clinicians won't ever get a chance to treat them until it's too late if they're not coming forward. So that and screening programs as well will hopefully help towards that.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Jackie, ask you next. There we go.
Fantastic. That was the quickest yet. Can I just say before I answer the question that the frustration for me, having been a politician in the Scottish Parliament for 20 years, is the questions haven't changed. And that tells me that actually the policy hasn't changed and we haven't done enough, and we cannot simply afford to wait anymore. So forgive me for saying that, but it was just to touch on that frustration. In terms of less survivable cancers, I agree with a rarer cancer strategy. Early diagnosis is key. But at the end of the day, it does come down to measuring what matters to us. I'm conscious in Scotland, the NHS only measures the top 10 cancers, but in England and in Northern Ireland, I believe, I'm not quite sure about Wales, they measure them all, and they measure the waiting times for them all. There's a very simple change that the Scottish Government could do, rather than just leave it to campaigns or people to spot this themselves or to have an alert GP. Let's change that culture, because if you measure it, it matters to you, and that drives change behaviours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Great. And finally, Alison, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. There are two things here, aren't there? There's the way we respond immediately, and there's the fact that we do need to make long-term progress on these rarer and unsurvivable cancers. I think one thing is absolutely key, though, having a diagnosis of an unsurvivable cancer is obviously devastating for the person and the family. So I think we need to make sure that we have appropriate support in place for them. We need to make sure that we've got carer support. It may be that a loved one wants to be around, and we need to make that possible for them. So we also need to have, a robust social security net there as well that's supporting people, making sure, as we have done through the Social Security Act, that timely access to benefits is available. And I know that some of the organisations who are tuned in today play a really strong role in making sure that that is the case. Mental health support here is absolutely key. And just access to services that improve health and well-being. And I know, again, there's so many of the organisations working today, whether it's a massage or a chance to have a cup of tea with other people in a similar situation, or those caring for loved ones who find themselves in a situation like this is available. So it's not all about, I suppose we need the best medical services, and we need the best social services, and we need the best financial support available at that time to make this daunting diagnosis and the time ahead as positive as it possibly can be, just so that people know that we've got their back and we're absolutely there for them. And at the same time, we need increased awareness, information raising campaigns, so that people understand what the symptoms might be, something they might have brushed off as not that big a deal that might have led them to go to a GP in the first place. So I just want to...
Alison, sorry, you're out of time, Ben. Thank you for that. That was a fair range of answers there for you, Emily. So thank you for your question. Yeah, smashing. Well, we're just about out of time, and pretty much perfectly as well. I would just like to thank the candidates for their time today. So thank you to Alison, Jackie, David, Rebecca and Miles. I do appreciate that you're extremely busy, and it was great to have you here and helping sort of talk about cancer and your priorities for cancer services if your parties and if yourselves are elected. I'd also like to thank all of the attendees who have joined us today. I would particularly like to thank the members of the coalition who have all worked extremely hard behind the scenes to make sure that today was a success. The key people know exactly who they are, because we've been emailing about 400 times a day this week. Just to remind you all that this has been recorded and will be shared on the Scottish Cancer Coalition website as soon as possible. You can read more about the work of the Scottish Cancer Coalition at our website, which is scottishcancercoalition.org.uk, or follow us on Twitter at ScotCancerCo. And without further ado, I would just like to tell you all to enjoy the rest of your day, get out, get some vitamin D in the sunshine, and thank you very much for all of your time today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
No.